The chamber's silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the energy field that enclosed the boy. Dorian Kane, 12 years old, stood in its center, his thin frame rigid with defiance despite the cold terror curling in his stomach. He had never seen a room like this, smooth metallic walls that pulsed with veins of cobalt light, an arched ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. The air smelled of sterile machinery, the kind that erased mistakes without leaving a trace. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a throne of obsidian stone, was the one who would decide his fate. Prince Arkan Zelvaris, second son of the Emperor, watched him with the idle curiosity of a man inspecting a caged animal. His carapace gleamed in the dim light, segmented plates shifting as he adjusted his posture. The ridges along his elongated skull flared slightly, a gesture of mild interest. Beside him, Commander Jorek stood with hands clasped behind his back, his uniform pristine, not a crease out of place. He was smaller than the prince but no less imposing, his deep-set black eyes void of empathy. At the prince's left, Interrogator Svenk leaned forward, his elongated fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern against the armrest. "State your name," Jorek commanded, his voice clipped and cold. Dorian swallowed, lifting his chin. "Dorian Kane." A brief pause. A glance exchanged between the Zelvari. "And your purpose for trespassing in a restricted sector?" "I wasn't trespassing," Dorian said quickly. "I was just—" He hesitated. The truth felt feeble in his mouth. Starving, searching for food scraps near the supply district. None of it would matter. "I was trying to find something to eat." Svenk let out a low chittering sound, amusement flickering in his gaze. "A common thief then?" Dorian bristled. "I didn't steal anything." "Not for lack of trying," Jorek muttered, turning his attention back to the prince. "A human child caught near a classified outpost. If he had succeeded in escaping, he might have relayed information to insurgents." "I don't know anything about insurgents," Dorian protested. "I don't even know where I was." Prince Arkan leaned forward at that, his fingers steepled. "Perhaps not," he mused, voice smooth measured. "But intent is irrelevant. The fact remains that you were somewhere you did not belong." Dorian's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to scream at them to make them understand that he was just a boy, hungry, alone, desperate. But their minds were made up. He could see it in the way they looked at him, the way Arkan's expression never shifted from that distant, clinical detachment. "Humans have a peculiar habit," Arkan continued, "of believing their circumstances grant them clemency. That if they are weak, helpless, they should be spared." He tilted his head, dark eyes narrowing. "Do you think weakness is an excuse?" Dorian's hands curled into fists. His father had always told him never to beg. No matter how bad things got. No matter how hopeless. "No," he said through clenched teeth. Arkan smiled. "Good." He turned to Jorek. "The sentence." Jorek straightened. "By decree of the Zelvari Empire, unauthorized incursion into restricted zones is punishable by summary execution." A cold spike of fear lanced through Dorian's chest. He had known somehow that this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way nothing else had. He searched the faces before him, looking for some hint of mercy, some sign that this was a test, a bluff, a cruel lesson meant to frighten him into submission. He found nothing. Svenk stood, moving to the console embedded in the wall. "Shall we proceed, my prince?" Arkan did not hesitate. "Do it." The energy field around Dorian flickered, shifting from a pale blue to a deep, pulsing crimson. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber as the disintegration array powered up, its coils glowing white-hot with lethal charge. Panic surged, but Dorian swallowed it down. He would not scream. He would not beg. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "Be strong, son. Never let them see fear." The last thing he saw before the world turned to light was Arkan's expression, still distant, still detached. As if the life of a human child had never mattered at all. The transmission arrived in the dead of night, slipping through encrypted channels like a whispered confession. It carried no introduction, no warning, only a brief file stamped with the Zelvari Imperial seal. The moment Adrian Kane saw his son's name attached, the world around him ceased to exist. He played the recording once. Then again. And again. The image was grainy, pulled from the Zelvari's own surveillance archives. A boy, small and defiant, standing alone in a cavernous chamber. Dorian. His son. 12 years old, unarmed, trapped in the center of an energy field. The Zelvari prince sat in judgment, flanked by his officers. Kane watched as they mocked the boy, as they twisted his words, as they condemned him with casual, bureaucratic cruelty. Then the sentence was given. The screen filled with white light. And Dorian was gone. Kane had fought battles in the cold vacuum of space. He had burned cities, razed entire colonies, orchestrated the deaths of thousands without flinching. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. The silence after the recording ended was absolute, an emptiness that stretched inside him, hollowing out everything that had once been human. "General?" The voice barely registered. Kane sat motionless, staring at the screen as though he could will it to change. His fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair, his knuckles bone white. "General," the voice repeated, firmer now. A presence stepped into his periphery, Captain Elias Rourke, his most trusted officer. The younger man's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes flicked toward the frozen image on the screen. Kane exhaled slowly, forcing his voice to steady. "How did we get this?" "Intercepted from an Imperial relay," Rourke said. "The Zelvari recorded it for internal documentation. Standard procedure after an execution." The word sent a fresh spike of pain through Kane's chest, but he didn't react. He couldn't. Who else has seen it? No one outside this room. Kane finally turned, his gaze meeting Rourke's. "Good. Destroy every copy but mine." Rourke hesitated. "Sir." "Do it." The captain gave a slow nod and left without another word. Alone, Kane leaned back in his chair, fingers pressing against his temples. He had spent years in exile, hiding from the Empire's reach, biding his time after the last war had ended in uneasy silence. He had been prepared to die forgotten, a ghost of a soldier in a war the galaxy had chosen to forget. But they had taken his son. They had killed Dorian not as a soldier, not as a threat, just as a message. A demonstration of power. A reminder that humanity was nothing to them. The Zelvari believed they had ended something that day. What they failed to understand was that they had begun something far worse. Kane reached for the console, his fingers moving with mechanical precision as he activated a series of hidden channels. One by one, old frequencies flared to life, long-dormant command lines reawakening. Across the sector, encrypted beacons began to transmit, calling warriors out of the shadows, summoning fleets that had gone dark years ago. One name. One message. One war. The Zelvari Empire had made its final mistake. And Adrian Kane was going to burn it to the ground. The Zelvari outpost hung in the void, a gleaming citadel of polished obsidian and cobalt light. A fortress world, bristling with defenses, guarded by a fleet that had never known defeat. From its highest spires, officers watched the stars with idle confidence, secure in the knowledge that no force could challenge the might of the Empire. Then the sky burned. It began with silence. The Imperial long-range sensors, infallible for decades, flickered and died in an instant. Communication lines fractured, scrambled by a virus so precise it bypassed every failsafe, turning security systems into static. By the time Admiral Harkey's Veer registered the anomaly, it was too late. The human fleet emerged from the darkness like wraiths, their ships coated in Black Ops plating that absorbed all light. They did not announce their arrival, did not issue demands. They simply opened fire. The first wave came as a surgical strike. Precision railguns shattered the outpost's orbital sentries before they could sound the alarm. Kinetic slugs, traveling at near-relativistic speeds, cored through hulls like paper. Explosions rippled across the station's outer rings, fire blooming in the vacuum. Admiral Veer staggered forward in the command deck, his mandibles clicking in shock as the warning sirens finally howled to life. Return fire. Deploy countermeasures. His subordinates scrambled to obey, but the defenses were unresponsive. The virus had done more than blind them, it had severed control entirely. The orbital cannons remained inert, shield arrays flickering uselessly. The fortress, designed to repel entire armadas, was defenseless. The humans were already inside. Colonel Tobias Slade led the ground assault, his soldiers pouring from drop ships in silent, synchronized waves. They moved like phantoms, clad in matte black armor, their visors reflecting only death. The Zelvari guards barely had time to draw their weapons before they were cut down, short, efficient bursts of gunfire reducing them to twitching husks. Slade stepped over the bodies without a second glance, his gaze locked on the towering structure ahead. The command citadel. His orders were clear. The prince was inside. He breached the entrance with a controlled charge, the reinforced doors crumpling under the detonation. Smoke and fire billowed outward, but Slade moved through it unshaken, his rifle raised. The halls beyond were a slaughterhouse, Zelvari officers clawing for weapons, shouting frantic orders, dying before they could finish speaking. By the time he reached the throne chamber, the resistance had collapsed. The once pristine floors were slick with blood, the banners of the empire draped over the dead like funeral shrouds. And at the heart of it all, trembling behind a squad of doomed bodyguards, was Prince Arkan Zelvaris. Slade lowered his rifle, stepping aside as the last figure entered the room. Adrian Kane. The general moved without hurry, his boots echoing against the stone. His face was unreadable, his gaze empty of rage or satisfaction. Only purpose. Arkan's mandibles trembled. This is madness. You cannot. Kane raised a hand, and Slade executed the bodyguards with methodical precision. They crumpled without ceremony, leaving the prince alone. You killed a child, Kane said, his voice quiet. Arkan swallowed. He was a trespasser. You killed my son. Silence. Kane raised his sidearm. There was no speech, no trial, no hesitation. The prince died the way he had condemned Dorian, reduced to nothing in an instant. Slade turned to his commander. Orders. Kane holstered his weapon. Burn it. The Zelvari homeworld burned. Across the empire, flames of retribution consumed once proud cities, their towering spires reduced to charred husks. Adrian Kane had given the order without flourish, without malice. The war was not one of conquest, nor one of diplomacy. It was annihilation. Zelvari fleets, once unmatched in their dominion, crumbled under the relentless human assault. Kane's forces struck with ruthless efficiency, severing supply lines, decimating shipyards, and crippling every strategic installation that had once given the empire its power. The humans did not seek surrender. They did not offer terms. They came as executioners, and the Zelvari, who had ruled for centuries, finally understood fear. Admiral Harkis Veer stood on the bridge of the last great dreadnought of the Imperial fleet, watching the slaughter unfold. The space around Zelvaris Prime was choked with debris, shattered hulls drifting aimlessly, escape pods left untethered, their occupants suffocating in the abyss. The once glorious Imperial Navy, built on centuries of dominance, had been reduced to smoldering wreckage in a matter of days. Veer clenched his mandibles. What forces remain? A withered communications officer, his uniform stained with ash and blood, hesitated before answering. Scattered resistance across the outlying systems. But the core fleets, they're gone, sir? Gone. The word tasted like poison. Veer turned his gaze back to the viewport. He had underestimated humanity. They all had. For years, the Zelvari had treated them as lesser beings, a species meant to be ruled or discarded. And now, because of one boy, the Zelvari Empire was dying. A proximity alarm wailed, snapping Veer from his thoughts. He saw them then, the final wave. The human fleet had regrouped, their formation tight, disciplined. They did not rush. They advanced with the certainty of an executioner drawing his blade. In the center of the fleet, at the helm of the command dreadnought Retribution, stood Adrian Kane. Veer knew that face now. He had studied the reports, the intercepted transmissions. He had read the files from the last war, back when Kane had been a name whispered in Imperial war councils. A human general who had once led with cold, calculated precision. A man they had believed lost to history. A father they had unknowingly wronged. Veer's claws tightened around the rail. He could order a final charge. He could fight, could die with honor. But honor had lost its meaning. The Empire is finished, he muttered. The officer swallowed. Sir? Veer exhaled slowly. Send the final transmission. Let those who remain know, it is over. A long pause. Then, slowly, the officer nodded. Across the dying Empire, the last command of Admiral Harkis Veer echoed through the void. The Zelvari war was over. Adrian Kane had won. The throne room of the Zelvari Emperor was silent. Once, it had been a place of grandeur, where rulers passed judgment from a seat of obsidian and gold. Now it was a tomb. The banners of the Empire lay in tatters, the polished floors slick with the blood of its last defenders. Smoke curled from shattered walls, and the acrid scent of burning metal clung to the air. Adrian Kane stood at the base of the dais, his boots leaving dark streaks as he approached the fallen sovereign. Emperor Zelvaris, once the most powerful being in the known galaxy, lay slumped against his throne, his once pristine robes torn and stained. His breathing was ragged, his forearms clutching at the wound in his side, a wound Kane had personally delivered minutes before. The Emperor's mandibles twitched as he struggled to speak. You don't understand what you've done. Kane crouched before him, meeting his fading gaze with cold indifference. I understand perfectly. Zelvaris bared his teeth in a weak, bitter smile. You think this is victory? You think killing me will bring you peace? A hacking cough racked his frame. You are no hero, Cain. You are a force of destruction. And one day your own kind will fear you as much as we did. Cain considered the words. There was no anger in him, no triumph, only the dull weight of inevitability. He had never fought for peace. He had fought for justice. For vengeance. And justice, as the Zelvari had learned too late, did not come gently. He rose to his feet and lifted his sidearm. The Emperor did not beg. The shot rang out, final and absolute. The Zelvari Empire was no more. Outside the palace, the city burned. His men moved through the ruins, their mission nearly complete. Pockets of resistance had been silenced, the last embers of defiance crushed beneath the weight of the human war machine. The Empire's vast territories, once stretching across the stars, had fractured into lawless remnants. Some would flee into exile. Others would kneel. None would ever rise again. Cain stepped onto the balcony overlooking the ruined capital. The sky above was choked with the wreckage of fallen ships, the ground below littered with the remnants of a civilization that had believed itself invincible. The war was over. Behind him, Colonel Slade approached. It's done, sir. Cain didn't respond at first. He looked to the stars, to the endless void where his son had been taken from him. Dorian was gone. Nothing could change that. He exhaled, slow and steady. Then we leave. Slade hesitated. And the survivors? Cain turned, his gaze as cold and hollow as the empire he had just destroyed. Let them remember. Without another word, he walked away, leaving behind the ashes of an empire that had dared to take what was his.